Hi, welcome back. My name is Felicia and I'm a knitter living in Washington, D.C. And this is my little corner of the internet where I like to share everything that I'm knitting.
Hi, Editing Felicia here. I did not realize how out of focus I am for a lot of this video, so please bear with me. I think that you can see everything in the video, but at times your eyes may make you believe that you are having some sort of vision problems. It is not you, it is me. So please forgive me. I hope that you can tolerate it, and it should be resolved in the next video. All right, thanks.
I am so excited to give an update on everything that has been on my needles so far in 2025. But before we get started, I do want to take a moment to thank everyone who watched my last video, Everything I Knit in 2024, and left kind comments and just expressed how happy you were to see what I was sharing and how excited you are that I'm back to creating content for YouTube. I too am very excited to be back in this space, and I think the time that I took away really did help to spark my creativity and my passion and help me find my own voice and vision within knitting by taking a step back from what everybody else is doing. I want to thank everyone for their kind words. It was really heartwarming to know that there are people out there who still care and are still curious about what I'm making and want me to share those things out. So again, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for watching that video and for the kind words. If you want to know what I'm wearing, this is the Tulip Guernsey. It is a pattern by Midori Hirose. This is one of the projects that I finished in 2024. If you want to know more about it and the yarn and the modifications that I made, I will link to my Everything I Knit in 2024 video, and you can get all of the details about it there. This is just the perfect, cozy, oversized, in the house type of sweater, and I love it, and I love the way that it wears. I love the way that it feels. But I don't know how I feel about this length of sleeve. I might go back and add maybe like another inch. I like where it hits, but I could go for just a little bit more fabric between here and my watch. That is like the ideal place for it to end. But honestly, I don't know. This like length of sleeve has been really nice because I don't have to worry about rolling it up or folding it up when I'm typing at the computer. It doesn't really get in the way. That's sort of the reason why I've been hesitant to rip this out or rip out the cuff and add more length, because I don't hate the length of it. I think I kind of enjoy it. It's just new and it's different and I'm not used to it. So I'm giving myself a little bit more time to figure out how I feel about this particular length of sleeve before I make a decision about what I'm gonna do. Everything that I discussed today will be linked below. What I find to be the easiest is to just link to the Ravelry page for the project that I'm discussing. And there you can see the yarn, you can see any modifications that I made, anything that I've sort of missed will be contained in the Ravelry notes. If Ravelry is not accessible for you, please feel free to reach out to me and I will try to convey the whatever information you're looking for to you. The first project that I have is this hot water bottle cover. This is knit out of Swanky Sock by Magpie Fiber. And this is one of the Fiber Society colors. For a couple of years, I got the Magpie Fiber Society box, which is basically, I think it's like a monthly club where it's either monthly or quarterly. It's at some regular interval. You receive 2 skeins of either the Swanky Sock or the Swanky DK. I don't know if this is still something that they have going on, but I did it for 2 years and I acquired a lot of Magpie Fiber yarns that way. The issue that I ran into with that particular club was that it was 2 skeins, and for me to do a sweater project and a fingering weight, I normally need 3 to 4 skeins, so it was never really quite enough to do a garment for me. The other thing is that the yarns were usually heavily speckled or variegated, which I have talked about at length before is not really my preferred type of yarn for garments. But I ended up with all of this yarn and I didn't really know what to do with it. And last year, I noticed on Ravelry that people were making hot water bottle covers. And I had never really used hot water bottles. So I started to look into them and I was like, oh, this is so for me. Like, this is my type of cozy. And if you're wondering what a hot water bottle looks like, I can show you 2 of the ones that I have. So this is the small one. And then this is my large one. So I actually have 3. I have 2 of the large ones and 1 of the small ones. Anyway, What you do is you boil water, you let it cool down, then you pour it in the hot water bottle. And what I like to do with mine is I like to lay them on my bed to warm up my bed, and then I will cuddle with them either on the sofa or cuddle with them at night as I'm falling asleep, because I like to keep my house really, really cold, but I like a really warm, cozy bed, and I've always been terrified of electric blankets, and so this is the perfect alternative. I'm on a tangent. The point is that you can knit a cover for your hot water bottle, and that is what I have chosen to do. So I made one for my mom earlier this year, and I used this color of Magpie fiber, and it again was out of the Fiber Society box, and I held it double because the pattern calls for, I think, either DK or Aran. I think it has numbers for DK or Aran weight, and so I used the DK numbers, but I held it double. And the pattern is simple enough that you can kind of freestyle it on the go. There's 2 pages that are included. One has actual stitch counts and numbers, and the other one you can figure out your gauge and use that to help to determine the numbers that you'll need. The first one that I did, I cast on the number of stitches for the DK weight one, and then I just adjusted from there. For this one, I'm using the stitch count for the Aran weight, and as you can see, this one is for my smaller one. As you can see, I am basically to the decreases for the shoulder part. So in a couple more rounds, I'm going to start decreasing for this, and then you knit a bunch of ribbing up, and then you fold it over double. So this is a really simple project, and for me, it's actually becoming a project to help me use up some of this excess yarn that I haven't really found a use for, and then I might make some socks or something with what's left, but I just wasn't using the yarn, and this felt like something that was low stakes, easy. And the Swanky sock is an 80-10-10, so it's 80% merino, 10% cashmere, 10% nylon. So it's really next to skin soft, which is perfect for a hot water bottle cover, and it uses up a pretty significant amount of the yarn too. So this has been a really great project. It's so mindless, and I usually am working on it in meetings to just have something that's quick and easy and knitting in the round. The one thing that I will say about this pattern is that I had never done Judy's Magic cast on, which I know is a pretty traditional cast on for people who knit toe up socks. I've never done it before, and in my mind, it was a really intimidating technique. It is so simple to do, and so now this has inspired me to want to try to knit a toe up socks. The next project that I've been working on, kind of off and on at this point, is my Christmas sweater from 2024. So this is Northern Augustine's number 6, I believe. I am knitting this out of the yarn called for in the pattern, which is Crea Deluxe Organic Wool, held double with their mohair in the corresponding colors. I ended up ordering a kit for this project. So to give a little context, last year I knit the Festive Yoke Pullover by Skander Knits, and I knocked that sweater out in about 2 weeks. If you want to hear all about how I ended up picking that sweater and doing all of that, I will link to the video, but I ended up knitting it in about 2 weeks, and I was just feeling so festive, and I was like, I want to knit another Christmas sweater. And I had been seeing this sweater on my Ravelry For You page, or the Hot Right Now, whatever, and I was like, I'm obsessed with this. It's so whimsical, and it seems like it will be a fairly easy knit because there's only this color work right here in the top of the yoke. So I went on a mission to try to find the yarn for it. Usually when I like a sample, I will just try to see what the yarn is that was used in that sample and knit that. I'm not always the most creative in that sense, especially if it's something that's color work. I usually will follow whatever is in the sample. I'm not that great with picking my own colors. So I looked up the yarn, and there was the yarn manufacturer, which I believe is Danish. They had a kit, and the kit was on sale. So I priced it out, and it was going to be a pretty splurgy sweater. And I didn't want to spend that much money on a Christmas sweater that I was going to wear a couple times a season. And I was like, I'm going to try to find an alternative. And I just wasn't finding the colors that really corresponded to the pattern. I really liked the colors in this pattern, and I didn't want to deviate from that at all. So I kept looking, and I I couldn't make it work. The other thing is that by the time I pieced together all of the colors that were needed for this, I was going to end up spending about $40 less than what I would spend to just buy the kit and have it shipped to me. So I decided, I had not really been purchasing a lot of yarn last year. I just decided that I was going to treat myself to this sort of overpriced Christmas sweater. Ordered the yarn. It was packaged beautifully. Like, it was a wonderful little Christmas treat to myself. And I immediately cast it on, and I loved it, okay? I loved knitting this sweater. The only thing I did not like, and this is very Felicia specific, so take this with a grain of salt. There are several rows in the yoke that are 3-color color work. I am not the best at 3-stranded color work, and I was very nervous coming off of the festive yoke pullover that I was going to experience the same puckering that I experienced in that project. So I really took my time with the 3-color color work. I tried a couple of different techniques. I am a continental knitter. I usually hold the yarn in my left hand, and even with color work, I will hold both strands on my left pointer finger and have the main color on to the right and the contrasting color to the left. So I experimented with holding all 3 strands that way and having a kind of, picking the color that I needed as I needed it. Picking the color I needed as it came up in the chart. And that worked, but it just felt very clumsy, and I was like constantly having to readjust, and I just did not enjoy that. So I was trying to see if I have one around here. I tried a knitting thimble, is that what it's called? Where you like put it on and it has the feeder rings for 2 strands of yarn. So I tried that, and that worked a little bit as well. Kind of ran into the same issues with tensioning my yarn. I also tried just holding the main color in my right hand and then the 2 contrasting colors on my left hand. All of them felt clumsy, and I did not enjoy it. So I just basically suffered through it. But there were a lot more 3-color color work rows than I anticipated. So the yoke actually took me an incredibly long time. I think if it had just been 2 colors, I would have gotten through the yoke really quickly. Anyway, it is obvious that I did not finish this sweater for Christmas. My goal was to have it done by Christmas Eve. It just did not happen. I ended up having to do a lot of work over the holiday, and I was sick, and so it just didn't work out. So I have now finished a good chunk of the body, and I've finished one. I'm going the wrong way. Okay. I have finished a good chunk of the body, and I have finished one sleeve, and so I have the yarn attached for the second sleeve. So my plan at this point is to finish the second sleeve, block this, and then hibernate it until probably September or October, and then I'll pull it out and I'll finish the rest of the body. Right now this is mindless TV knitting or like meeting knitting, but I also just don't want to be knitting on a Christmas sweater all year. So I think I'll be much more motivated to actually finish it as we get closer into the holiday season. But for now, I just want to get it not attached to yarn. This is my first time doing a pattern by Anne-Sophie Velling. I have enjoyed it. She has a very concise pattern writing style, and I don't know if it's because this is a relatively simple sweater. It's just a round yoke with color work at the top, increases worked in between the bands of color work. So I don't know if that's why the pattern is so simple and so sparse, but I actually enjoy that as a more experienced knitter. I don't always need or want a ton of instruction, but I found this to be the perfect amount of instruction. I also did some modifications in terms of the fit, so I rearranged the stitch count for the front and the back. I've talked about this before, but I have a much smaller upper bust than I do full bust, and so sometimes I will pick a pattern size based on my full bust, sometimes I will pick it based on my upper bust. This time I picked a size based on my full bust because I wanted it to be oversized and casual and fun. I feel like that kind of played into the whimsical nature of the pattern. So I did pick according to my full bust size. So I did just a little bit of tweaking, not as much as I would normally do, but I did a little bit of tweaking on the stitch distribution when I split for sleeves. Otherwise, I think that's all of the major information. I am knitting the 3rd size, and that is the size based on my bust measurement. I did not gauge swatch. I don't know if I'm on gauge, but I have tried it on and it fits beautifully. So I will, I guess, measure the gauge when I'm done and see how on point I am. But So far, I've been loving it, and I think I will probably knit more patterns of hers, especially since I kind of already have some in my pattern library, and I think I have some yarns that might work for some of them. So I've been enjoying that as my second WIP, soon to be hibernating WIP. Another project that has been taking up time on my needles and taking up some way more mental energy than I expected it to, but in a good way, is oh, we're all tangled up. Okay. This is the Louder Vest by Creabea, Rebecca Clow, Creabea here on YouTube. So you get so much pattern for your buck. There are two like packets in the pattern. The first one is you get the cardigan and you get a pullover, you have a V-neck and you have a round neck. And then you also have the vest, which again has a round neck and a V-neck option. I am doing the vest with the V-neck option, and I am knitting I'm knitting somewhere between the third and the fourth size. And that's why, and here's why I say that. One of the things that I had seen in the Ravelry notes about this project was that the armhole depth was really tight. And you can kind of see it in the picture. It comes up really high under the arms. And for me and my body type, that does not work for me, because my full bust is going to eat up a lot of the measurement and the height in something. And in an all over cabled vest, there's not really an option to add in bust darts, at least not that I am aware of. I'm sure a much more skilled knitter could figure out how to do short rows in cables and add bust darts. I'm not that person. So because I wanted this project to have neutral to slightly positive ease but not be oversized, I did my own modifications. Fairly simple modification, but something that I knew needed to be done in order for me to end up with a garment that I was going to appreciate and want to wear. So what I did, and I also thought that the V-neck was kind of shallow, so I wanted it to be a little bit deeper. So I just extended the V-neck shaping. And there's going to be ribbing around this as well. And if anything, I can just make the ribbing a little bit deeper to kind of eat up some of that space if I need to. Same for the armhole. So in extending the V-neck, I also extended the armhole depth. And I enjoy the way that this sits and looks on my body much, much more than I think I would have the way that the pattern is originally written. So that's why I say I'm kind of going between sizes, because I believe for some of the larger sizes, you do more rows of the V-neck. At least that's how I remember it. For this, you do start on the back panel. So you start the back, you knit flat, obviously, and you add the shaping. So what I did is it tells you where to stop, and I just put in like one of these, a cable, and left the yarn attached, and then picked up and did the front, and then as I was knitting, I kept keeping a gauge of how it was sitting and fitting, and then when I got it to the dimensions that I needed, I went back to the back and added a little bit more length so that it would come and sit sort of neatly the way that it needed to, and then I joined in the round. And so I recently joined it in the round and kind of lost steam on it, to be honest. It was much easier to knit flat, it was much easier to knit this flat. You do the cable on the entire round. You do the cable on the entire round on the same row, right? And it's whatever, repeat. When you're knitting flat, it's much easier to keep up with where you are in the cable chart, right? So you do the cable row, and then you knit and purl a certain number of rows, and then you do the cable row. When you're knitting in the round, when you're knitting cables in the round, you have to concentrate a lot harder on what row you are in between the cable twist. And I messed that up at one point, and then I just threw it in a bag, and I was annoyed. I have since regained some mental clarity and mental capacity, and now have the energy to figure out those sorts of things. So I have since corrected that mistake and am now just knitting, knitting around and around. What I am doing to keep track of where I am is a trick that I've utilized lots of times and recommend to lots of people, which is that I will use a stitch marker, usually one like this. You're not going to be able to see this. I don't know why I'm even trying to show. But anyway, I'll use a little hexagon stitch marker as my row counter. And that to me is much easier than having to keep up with an actual physical row counter and click on it. So I will use that as my row counter. And then when I get to a twist row, I know that I need to just cable twist and keep it moving. So that's what I've been doing for the Louder Vest. I am knitting this in Cascade 220 Sport in the color, I believe it's like Evergreen Heather or something like that. I can show you what it looks like. Yeah, I think it focuses better when it's in front of my face. So this is the shade Evergreen Heather. I love cabled garments that are in a darker colored yarn. What I am realizing is I think the secret to being able to do that and still have the cables pop is to use a more heathered yarn. So it's hard to read on camera, and even in person it's hard to read that the yarn is heathered, but it allows the texture to kind of pop out because there are highlights and lowlights in the yarn. This is a color that I used in my Christmas sweater, and when I was knitting with it, I just could not get the color out of my mind, and I knew that I wanted something else in that, and I didn't just want a plain stockinette garment. I wanted something with texture. I wanted something that was fun, and I wanted to sort of play with that juxtaposition of cables on a darker colored yarn, because I know that that is not typically what is recommended. It's typically recommended to use something that is lighter in color that will allow the cables to kind of pop out and shine. So I wanted to do something a little darker and play with that a little bit more. And one thing that was a sort of pattern for me last year was that I would use a color and a pattern and be inspired by it and just kind of like keep building out from a pattern that I was working on. And this is kind of an offshoot of that. I was just so inspired by that color and I wanted more of it. And this felt like the thing that I needed to cast on to kind of get that color out of my brain. It was like I had a worm about this particular color. I did have to go up, I believe, a needle size. I started knitting it on the recommended needle and knew immediately that I was not gonna hit gauge. Like, it just didn't look great. So that's why I have this sort of odd in skein of yarn, ball of yarn right here. When I finish this, I think I'm gonna give it a mid-project block and just kind of see how it looks. And I will also, at that time, add the armhole, the armband, and the neck, the collar to it as well after I do that sort of mid-project block. But this is back sort of being on my mind and something that I have the mental energy to work on, and I'm really enjoying it. As far as the pattern is concerned, it's really well written. It's, you know, there's lots of sizes, there's lots of ways to customize. And so I felt really empowered just sort of how her pattern is written to make my own modifications, which I would have done anyway because I modify almost every single pattern that I knit. But what I will say is that if you are not comfortable with cables or familiar with sort of your own body measurements in that way, or what you think, how you want a garment to fit, what your preferences are, I don't know that this would be the first garment that I would go into sort of modifying. But if you're adventurous, you can modify it because it's just yarn. If it doesn't work, you can rip it back out. You can do it again. If you did it once, you can do it twice. If you did it twice, you can do it a million times. So I have just been sort of designing on the needles with this one and making sure that at every step before I kind of move on to the next thing, that I'm satisfied with the results that I'm seeing and how things are progressing. So I'm really enjoying that project. That will be something that probably takes a little while to finish because cables grow slowly. And yeah, I don't anticipate that this will be something that's done in the next month or so, but I would like to be able to wear it sort of during the transitional spring weather. I'm not putting a ton of pressure on myself to finish it, and I'll finish it when I finish it. My final whip has a little bit of a tale, a little bit of a story. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride while we go on this journey. So I have talked about this in the past, but I am not a huge fan of setting knitting goals. for me personally, it stresses me out. I find that I become way more concerned about meeting the objective than about enjoying the process to knit the thing. With that being said, I do want to be very intentional about how I use up and consume the yarn that I've already purchased. I have in the past purchased lots of yarn just off of vibes, and that's fine, but what I realized is that my vibes change and evolve over time. And so I've ended up with some yarns that have been a little bit more difficult for me to figure out a good use case for them, especially in my sweaters quantities of yarn or my garment quantities of yarn. I'm much better about knowing what kind of yarn I am attracted to buying versus what kind of yarn I am attracted to knitting versus what kind of yarn are going to produce garments that I'm actually going to wear. So I've now figured out the balance of what to buy and how much to buy, but there was a period of time where I did not have that balance. And during that time, I picked up a sweater's quantity of this yarn. This is, let me see if I can get it to focus. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Anyway. So during that time, I picked up this yarn. This is the Cori Confetti Cori Confetti by La BNMA. It is a DK weight, a pretty like middle of the road DK weight. It's also called Cori Worsted, which is the same weight but without the confetti bits in it, which are like recycled bits of La BNMA yarn. It is not a worsted weight yarn. It is actually a DK weight yarn. And it is 30% Coriadale, 30% recycled fibers, and 20% recycled threads. And I purchased a sweater's quantity of this yarn. This is not the type of yarn that I would put into a garment, but I have a garment's quantity of it. I also purchased it in the original like gray color and in the yellow color. And I had done a swatch using this, this sort of very, very vibrant hot pink mohair that I purchased from Maryland Sheep and Wool a couple of years ago. I picked up a huge cone of it, and I have been trying to figure out how to use it ever since. So I swatched, and I enjoyed the swatch. It was a brioche swatch, and I just really liked the way that the yarn and the mohair played together. I liked the way that the mohair sort of turned it into this really vibrant, almost magenta type of color. I really, really like that, especially in the brioche stitch. So this year, I got the urge to cast on a cardigan. And I was revisiting that swatch, and I was like, this is stunning. This is beautiful. Let me try to find a cardigan that is a DK weight plus a mohair and go for that to like work through this yarn. So I went on Ravelry. I looked at a couple of options. I had some pretty particular that I was looking for. So I wanted it to have V-neck shaping or some type of shaping. I don't enjoy cardigans that just go straight up or are just like round yoke with no shaping. I don't enjoy that. So I wanted something that had V-neck shaping to it or some kind of shaping. I wanted something that had a double knit button band. I am still not 100% sold on ribbed button bands. I'm open to the possibility, but I don't always love the way that they look. So I did not want a ribbed button band, and I did not want 2x2 ribbing because I personally like doing an Italian bind off or a sewn bind off, and it's really difficult to achieve a really neat finish with that with a sewn bind off. So those were the requirements for me for a cardigan. What I ended up landing on was the Champagne cardigan by Petite Knit. The yarn called for in the pattern, I believe, is like a Sandnes garn yarn, and it had it was a 1-to-1 match in terms of the yardage and the weight of that yarn. So I knew that this was a really good match. And then mohair is mohair to me. Surrey alpaca, I feel like changes the gauge more than mohair, but that's me personally. So I purchased the pattern, immediately cast it on. I did not do a gauge swatch, in large part because I've knit a few Petite Knit sweaters at this point, and I tend to be pretty spot on with her gauge if I'm using a comparable weight of yarn. So I cast it on, started knitting, made it almost to the sleeve split, and realized that I absolutely hated the color. Like, hated the color. It was so bright. It was so vibrant. And that was just not what I was going for. Like, that was not the vibes to me. It wasn't until I was knitting it that I realized that what I wanted was something moody, much more librarian vibes than what I was getting. So I went back to the drawing board to see if I had any like mohair that would be a much more appropriate color, something that would add some depth to this yarn. And I had 2 skeins of this really pretty burgundy mohair that Ayn from Passion Knits had gifted me, but I only had 2 skeins of it. So I knew that was not going to be enough for this pattern. But I knew that shade, that type of color would be perfect. So I went back on the prowl, I went on the hunt, and I ended up picking out this. I ended up picking out this mohair. And this is the shade Bordeaux from Knitting for Olive. I've never knit with Knitting for Olive before. I ended up ordering that and starting over, and this is what we've got so far. I love this. It is so beautiful, and it's knitting, like, it's doing exactly what I wanted to do, which is that it is sort of muting the speckles in a way without covering them. Let me hold them up together. It's muting the speckles without covering them. It's also like bringing out the depth of the color. It's making it a deeper color, less true purple, so you can kind of see them next to each other. There we go. You can see them next to each other. The Bordeaux is much more like burgundy and just like a deeper color. This is, to me, much more of a blue purple. So it blends them down. It's so pretty together. And the Knitting for Olive mohair is actually really, really soft. Again, I've never knit with it before. I enjoy it, and I do know that it has a little bit of a wool content to it, so I don't know if that also is what makes it a little bit less scratchy. I love it. So I plan on purchasing more of the Knitting for Olive mohair in other colors. And this shade in particular was really, really difficult to find. I tried to find it at my local yarn store. I tried to find it at yarn stores just within the US because I didn't want to import, mohair. Could not find it anywhere. They had the listings, but it was sold out everywhere. So I don't know if Knitting for Olive is planning to discontinue this color. I hope not. So yeah, that's the saga of how we got here. But before we even get to talk about the pattern, I have a different problem. I am nervous that I am not going to have enough yarn to finish this sweater. And I'm actually really pissed off about it. Okay, so I ordered 6 skeins of this yarn, which is a sweater's quantity for me in DK weight. I have never before weighed my yarn before starting a project. I know that there are much more diligent, meticulous knitters and note takers and things like that weigh their yarn and know exactly how much they started with and how much a sleeve does. I am not that girl. I need the friction between the idea and like starting the knitting to be as little as possible. I am a swatcher. I do enjoy swatching, and like that is as much work as I'm willing to put in on the front end before starting a project. But one of the ancestors came and tapped me on my shoulder and was like, you should weigh your yarn. So I weighed the yarn, and not a single one of my skeins was 100 grams. In fact, the heaviest skein of yarn was 93 grams. So the pattern for the size that I am knitting calls for 600 grams of yarn. And it is also the size, how do I phrase this? my size is the largest size that calls for 600 grams. So the next size up calls for 650 grams. And then there are like 3 or 4 sizes, I think maybe 3 sizes below mine that also call for 600 grams. So I know that I know that getting in a relative proximity to 600 grams is important, even with some of the like contingency that they add into it. But I am at about 540 grams of yarn. And like 60 grams of yarn is not an insignificant amount of yarn. That's basically half of a skein and a little bit of yarn that I paid for that I did not get. And there's not really much that I can do about it at this point because I ordered the yarn, I don't know, this is like super, super deep stash. So I think I ordered this yarn in maybe 2021, 2022. I have looked online. It is no longer being sold online or anywhere that I can find. So my next hope is that maybe somebody has some in their stash on Ravelry and I can maybe purchase a skein from them if I need it. But I'm annoyed beyond words at this. I have never had a situation where I have received less than 100 grams of yarn. And when I have, it's like 98. You know, like it's a couple of grams off in one skein. But this was every single skein. Every single one of the 6 skeins that I had was no more than 92 or 93 grams. I was pissed. Like I said, there's nothing that I can do about it except be creative and modify my work. So I haven't even talked about the sweater. It is a raglan style construction with a V-neck. So I knit until I split for sleeves, and then I worked through the skein that I had before I stopped. When I ripped out the yoke that I had previously done, I separated it from that mohair and I started to work on it again. So this is the yarn from the first yoke that I did. And I used about 80 grams, I think, as my maybe 75 grams to do the sleeve. I knit the sleeve as written. It is a little bit long, but I like it. So I'm gonna knit the second sleeve. I'm gonna have to break in. I only have 2 more skeins of this yarn. I have this skein and I have one other one. So I'm gonna finish the other sleeve. I know I'm gonna have to break into this skein a little bit to finish the sleeve. And then I'm gonna use whatever is left to knit the body. And then I'm gonna use the last skein to do the 4 inches of ribbing and the double knit button band. I'm hopeful that that will get me to where I need to be. I'm not certain because I don't knit at a worsted gauge very often. I think this might be maybe my second garment that's a worsted gauge. So I don't have a good sense of how much yarn it is going to take to do certain things. If this were a fingering weight or even a DK weight where it's a fingering held with a mohair, I can kind of gauge that I need, a skein and a quarter to do a sleeve. I need about this much to do. Like, I just don't have any frame of reference for how much yarn it is going to take to finish this sweater because I'm not used to knitting at this gauge. I think the sweater is a little cropped, so that should be fine. I have tried it on with the one sleeve and I think I will be okay. I think. I'm not certain. So what I opted to do was not bind off the sleeve. Because if I need to rip the sleeve back and redo it, it's just much easier to not have to pick out the bind off. And I also don't want to risk like losing any yardage of this yarn because it's precious at this point. So I may see what that looks like. The other thing that I'm going to do is once I finish both of the sleeves, I'm going to go ahead and block it. I'm going to see if this grows any, because if it does, then I will definitely rip back out the sleeve and kind of go from there. I have knit with this yarn before. I knit not the Cori Confetti, but the Cori Worsted. And I knit a cardigan out of it, a cabled cardigan, and it didn't really grow. So I think that I will be fine, but I just want to see. And that's really the best that I can do. So if any of you have knit the champagne cardigan before and know roughly how much yarn the button band eats up in terms of grams, that would be really helpful. I know that everybody's gauge is different and things like that can change, but that would be really helpful information to know. I'm trying to set aside a skein for the ribbing and the button band. because obviously I don't want to run out, but we'll see. This is an annoying problem to have. It will be fine. I will figure it out. It will all work out. But to say that I would be being dishonest and disingenuous if I didn't say that I was pissed off and annoyed that I am now in this position where I purchased a sweater's quantity of yarn and I can't trust it is actually a sweater's quantity of yarn. So anyway, that is my saga. I chose the size that fits my full bust. I'm knitting the fourth size, I believe. I am following the pattern exactly as written. I have not made any modifications. This is a pattern that I definitely could see myself knitting again, and because it is so simple, I could see myself doing color blocks or stripes. I have some yarn in mind to make another one, but I think if I do that one, I will size down and do, I guess, whatever the size is that's more appropriate for my upper bust versus my full bust. But I wanted this one to be kind of oversized and casual, especially with the confetti element of it, or the flex, what are those called? Anyway, the sort of tweedy nature of it. I didn't want it to be too fitted or formal or anything like that. The last thing is that I'm going to have to find some buttons for this cardigan. I think I'm going to try to find some at Maryland Sheep and Wool. There's usually a button vendor that has like vintage buttons and things like that. So I think I'm going to try to source some buttons from Maryland Sheep and Wool. I have a vision of the type of button that I want, so hopefully I can find it there. If not, I will probably try to source it off of Etsy. But I want some leather buttons, but I want them to be kind of large leather buttons, a little bit like more oversized than what you would typically see for a leather button. And I think that will add a really modern twist to a kind of classic vintage feel of button. So that's what I'm on the hunt for. And I feel like Maryland Sheep and Wool will be the perfect place to try to see what all of the options are. And then if not, I'll try to source something online. But I don't want like a whimsical, fun, or what's the other word? Like I want something a little bit more classic to help to tone down kind of the playful nature of this, but I also want it to be modern. I don't want it to look like it is actually a sweater from the 80s. I just want it to have that sort of 70s, 80s vibe to it, if that makes sense. I will keep you updated on how it goes. I've been working on this iteration of it for about a week, so it's growing really, really fast. I guess it's coming up closer to 2 weeks, but it's growing really fast, probably because it's worsted weight, and I am not hating the process of purling as much as I thought, but it is not something that I can work on for hours at a time. I have to kind of do it in 20-minute sort of increments and chunks of time. Otherwise, loving this pattern and excited to make maybe another one this year, but definitely in the future there will be more champagne cardigans. So that's everything that is currently on my needles. Like I said, I'm really excited for all the projects that I've been working on. I think each one of them has its own little place in sort of my knitting space at this time, and is allowing me to be able to knit a little bit more consistently, because I don't have just one type of project on my needles, and I don't have to problem solve and figure out how I feel about a certain project or figure out what I want to do sort of in the next stages of a project. And so that has actually allowed me to knit much more consistently than I was knitting in 2024. I do have some yarn coming in the next maybe week or so, and I have a couple of projects that I'm really excited to swatch for and get started on. So in the next episode, you will probably see some swatches or maybe a new cast on or two. We'll see. Anyway, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to sit and listen to me ramble and vent about the knits that I'm working on. I would love to know what's on your needles, so leave a comment below telling me what you're working on. If you've come up against any challenges in your projects, let me know what those challenges are, how you've resolved them, if you're still looking for a solution. And if you see somebody in the comments that's struggling with the project or has some questions, definitely please feel free to comment and help them out. Let's make this a space where we're all problem solving. Anyway, I will see you back here again on some day at some time with some knits to share. All right, thanks y'all. Bye.